Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cave Across Apologetics. I'm Patrick.
And I'm Tony.
And we're at our ultimate conclusion of the book, Truth in a Culture of Doubt. And hopefully you've enjoyed the book. We've covered a lot of different topics. Problem of evil. Can we trust that the Bible was, or the New Testament was written by the authors that claimed
or was
to have
it
been?
forged, or what? How does it compare with other, other books that we call apocryphal books that were written? Right. So there's a lot of stuff we've covered here.
Yep. There are contradictions in the Bible, all that stuff. So essentially, what our authors have done here is taken a book of Bart Ehrman's and kind of responded to it in a chapter form. So you've kind of gotten at least a version of Bart Ehrman's writings, and so obviously you probably would get a lot more detail if you read his stuff, but I think our authors have done a fair job of praising him when he gets things right, but also saying, hey, there's
some issues and problems.
Tomfoolery sometimes going afoot. And so we're taking this conclusion chapter because they do bring up still a lot of important points here. It's not just your standard, everyone should get along, or we should all try and understand more from each other's perspectives.
That's right.
The authors have a viewpoint that they want to present, and so that's what they're going to do here. And so we're going to cover that as best we can.
Yeah, this one is called Reasons to Believe. Right? Yeah.
And so they ask the question, can we trust the Bible? Because that's essentially what we've been asking in this.
At least the majority of the
For the most part,
book.
yeah. Can we trust God? Can we trust the Bible? Can we trust that the Bible accurately portrays who God is by the people that should know him, that he's entrusted his word to? All those things. So, can the Bible be trusted? Ehrman, as well as other critics, answer with a resounding no. Not shocking there. A lot of people would disagree with that. They insist that the Bible's difficulties are so extensive that skepticism is the only reasonable conclusion for an unbiased scholar.
Yeah.
I'd like to meet an unbiased scholar first, but okay. However, this is simply not the case. This is not to say that there aren't difficulties in the Bible, such as apparent chronological differences and theological tensions, which, hey, we've covered some of those in other books. Yeah. And there have been those things written about for thousands of years.
That's right.
They've been known, they've been discussed.
Yeah.
Early church fathers have talked about it. And you can get whole books just based on one thing, or the cleansing of the temple, or you get a book of the Bible difficulties, the best of them, and get them in short form or long form, or look at them in the Greek.
Best of the difficulties.
Something like that.
The most difficult of the difficulties.
Right. But as one scholar noted more than 25 years ago, the difficulties raised by the biblical phenomena are, on the whole, a good deal less intractable than is sometimes suggested. So usually it's this is the death knell for Christianity. This is the thing that proves them wrong. Or here's a historical fact that we know the Hittites didn't exist, and then suddenly we find the entire Hittite army and their entire civilization.
That's right. Pontius Pilate didn't exist. Oh, here we have an inscription, and it mentions Pontius Pilate.
Right.
Whoops. Right. Once again. So nevertheless, the church, to a large part, has not sufficiently taken note of and passed down the historical and theological knowledge that builds the foundations for reasonable faith, right? The church has kind of allowed this to kind of slip by and under the rug and that sort of thing, at least, in the past, right?
Yeah, I think James White has said in his show on the Dividing Line that he has to make this stuff known because he deals with people in debates that bring this stuff up, and it's just, why isn't it not known? It's because we kind of refuse to want to bring the Bible's true nature to life. We want that nice underpinning of, it was kind of handed down through mystery and it was perfectly preserved, and we don't need to look at the nuance, the messiness of history. If we all just have this idea that our authors talk about, that Bart Ehrman sometimes has of God has to do it this way. So if you're writing the Bible and you write John 3:16, you said, "For Jesus so loved the world," and your hand would stop, and there would be a mystery of
or you'd
guiding
automatically you'd write Jesus, but then it would turn into God.
right.
Yeah.
And so
yeah.
we just don't see that. And
Yeah.
I think the church wants to not get into that because they almost want to speak to the lowest common denominator. They don't want to explain it. They don't want people's faith to be shaken. They don't want to create a ruckus. They just want to kind of teach, and we all want to feel good in the sermon, or let's talk about sin or what Jesus does for us. But all that stuff we can kind of push it away.
Right.
That's for you to do in your own time. Which there's something to be said about that, but also we need to be honest about how we got the Bible, where it comes from,
Exactly.
The messy parts of history,
Right,
the fun
right.
parts of history.
And so into this environment, Ehrman has entered, right? He's found an audience among past and present churchgoers, some of them skeptics, many of whom are interested, shocked, and left wondering why they've never learned any of this in their churches. Right?
Yeah. And so, despite the anxiety that Ehrman's rhetoric can produce, however, in some ways he has done us all a favor. He has focused discussions on topics to which everyday Christians and pastors have given inadequate attention for too long.
Yeah.
And so,
So he's kind of forced the issue for us.
Yeah,
right?
he's made it popular, which is shocking, but it's almost like you can only have that type of fanfare from a skeptical point of view. So, this might be a God using imperfect people for
That's right.
perfect ways.
That's right. Yeah. Good. So, for instance, Ehrman frequently argues heresy has an equal claim as Christianity to orthodoxy in the early church, right? In making this argument, he notes that our New Testament canon could have easily included various Gnostic texts, right? So, why did we choose these? Well, the strongest, most powerful one kind of thing, right? However, as was pointed out by authors in chapter 5, Ehrman, in Did Jesus Exist, writes, and here's a quote from this book, we have nothing to suggest that the beliefs embraced by later Gnostic Christians were present in first century rural Palestine. And so the Gnostic sayings of Jesus found in such Gnostic Gospels as the Gospel of Philip or the Gospel of Mary almost certainly do not go back to Jesus himself, but were placed on his lips by his later Gnostic followers, right?
Okay.
And so he admits it.
Yeah, right.
Wow, So yes, these books these Gnostic books, like the Gospel of Philip or whatever, they don't go back to Jesus. They're not what he said. They're different than what he said. Okay, then why should we accept them, right? And that's why we don't accept them, right?
And so Ehrman tends to have this two point of view thing that he brings up in one, but not the other, or he says, the New Testament is the worst thing we could possibly have because those aren't the words of Jesus. They happen so far later. But then you ask him, well, where do we get the life of Jesus? Where's the best evidence from it? Well, from the New Testament
of course.
documents.
Yeah.
Okay, well, which is it? It can't be both. It seems like one's in the exclusion of the other.
Yeah, so, this kind of statement is helpful to his argument in a book, for instance, like Did Jesus Exist?
Right.
As he sets out to defend the historicity of Jesus. But it's contradictory to his views on early Christianity expressed in other places, right? And so you really can't have it both ways.
It doesn't seem like it. It seems like the two fall in contradictory paths. So while clearly many of his core beliefs have changed since his fundamentalist days, Ehrman's expectations for what the Bible must be in order for it to be considered inspired have apparently not changed all that much. And so this is kind of what we talk about when we talk about the fundamentalist view on the Christian side is, it's almost a Mormon type view of golden plates handed down or like a direct download, beam down from the Holy Spirit to the apostles, and they sat up straighter and wrote in the exact way that
automatons,
he
robots,
it, right? And so we just don't see that, and we see actually a better way of preserving or having confidence that the words that were meant for us to read today have been preserved and channeled appropriately. So in fact, it appears Ehrman has set the bar intentionally so high that no one will ever be able to satisfy his demands for sufficient evidence for faith. And we see this in some debates that he has where, he'll talk about that he won't believe that Mark wrote Mark unless Mark signed 3 different documents for it and all this stuff. It's like, well, you don't take that for the life of Caesar.
Prick with blood
or anything. The Shroud of Turin, something like that, yeah. For example, despite the New Testament manuscript evidence being far superior to any work of antiquity, that is not enough for Ehrman. Yeah. And so that's if you had that on the life of Caesar, if you had Caesar's own, hey, I'm going to pay you to follow me around and write all my pontifical sayings, then that would be a treasure trove for historians. They would love that.
Yeah.
What were you thinking when you had this battle where you were outnumbered 1-5 and you somehow lived and won the day and then crossed the Rubicon? What were you thinking as you did that? Yeah. They would love that.
Oh yeah, that'd be great. Yeah.
Here we have the same exact thing, and it's scattered to the winds because it has supernatural claims to it or origins from it.
Right. And so, despite the superiority of these books, he fails to accept them. Also, despite the core theological truths that run through the writings of the various authors of the New Testament and the legitimate diversity within these books, he sees theological contradictions, right? And yet, there are core truths. They all relate back to the New Testament. They're talking about Jesus and what he had to say. So in answering Ehrman's objections to faith in the God and Jesus revealed in the Bible, we have observed in this particular text here numerous reasons to believe, from the vast and early manuscript evidence to the remarkable unity amid the diverse New Testament authors and the various genres.
Right.
Ehrman's objections, it seems, once explored, point us to evidence in support of Scripture. Right. So he's as they have said, done us a favor.
Right. He says, like, if we can show that the New Testament authors used scribes, then my argument goes away. Well, that seems to be both internal and externally valid, and so it seems like his argument would go away, right?
Yeah.
No. And it's not like Ehrman doesn't know these and doesn't know this, and he hasn't worked with some of the best textual scholars in the world in his heyday.
And he is one of them.
Right,
frankly,
yes.
Yes.
Absolutely. You cannot knock him for his lack of credentials or experience, but there's just something of a roadblock, maybe a Romans 1 roadblock. So, however, if evidence is in support of is one thing, you might be saying, but I need proof.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, proof can be this tricky term that our authors point to.
Proof.
So, what is proof? How do we define proof?
2 plus 2 is 4. There's proof.
Sure, yes. A circle has no edges, has no corners.
Triangle is a 3-sided object,
yeah.
right? Let's go prove that.
And so we can do that same thing for history. Well, I can't tell you what I had for breakfast this morning, let alone, prove to you with that level of confidence that 2 plus 2 equals 4. Yeah. It's different types of proof, and we get in this especially with things like economics. There's a whole big divide between Keynesian economics and Austrian economics, where Keynesian wants to plug in all these different variables because you can essentially make a number for every human rational choice within up and down the line and sideways, micro, macro. But Austrian economics says you can't do this. This isn't like physics. You can't, say I want to make a house and you plug in the equation and boom, there's the house. Yeah. No, it's people making choices with so many different changing variables that you have to talk about it in terms of these kind of basic ideas and structures of praxeology, humans making decisions. So you can't codify that in that level. And so here, proof you can't do as evidence is it's not 100% to be shown. Things in history happen, but okay, how do you know that? Right. We say, there's video evidence that you can do, or photocopies. Well, all those can be fake too, right?
Yeah,
especially these days. If aliens landed on the White House lawn, how many of us would go, oh, this is like War of the Worlds radio show, the CNN's fake news, all that stuff. How do we do it today in things that happen in real time? And how many people, don't have any understanding before 1950, before the photocopier, before all this. How do we know Abraham Lincoln was alive? Well, he's on our money.
That's right.
Well, okay, but I mean, have you ever seen him? Have you ever? We have
Have you
portraits.
talked to him?
A lot of people understand that to be the case. Well, we don't have that type of evidence. All the time.
Yeah.
So we don't prove the results or prove the Bible. What can be shown is that trust in Scripture is reasonable, and an argument that makes sense can be made. And so we come from it from a presuppositional point of view, and so the confidence level is of a different way. But if you're talking about historical events and proving historical events, then that's a little different as far as what we're talking about.
Yeah, it's a different kind of, right. So, again, with regard to the past, one can't, empirically prove a historical event in the same way that one can prove, like what we have, the illustrations we were using with mathematical equations.
Right. And it's so easy to be a skeptic in that way because you just say, oh, well, it doesn't ring true to me, or, George Washington survived. Well, the apostles didn't exist in the same way. It just America started somewhere along the way, and people bought into this fiction. It's like Uncle Sam. George Washington is like Uncle Sam. We just kind of dreamt him up as propaganda. We're all just feeding into it, and he's a good idea, but that's all he is an idea. We knew that there were other presidents at the time that were all trying to vie for power. You do that. The skeptics have done that the same way with Jesus.
Yeah, right. And so, historical evidence can point strongly in one direction, but we don't get this mathematical conception of proof, right? Historical truths are tested by assessing hypotheses in view of the evidence, and then accepting the hypothesis that best explains the evidence, right? That's how we do it. It's inference to the best evidence. That's the kind of argument that we use. Thus, while historical proof is different from mathematical proof, historical evidence can be compelling and it can inspire confidence.
Right. So the origins of Christianity, one of the central historical questions we have yet to address in our response to Ehrman, our authors say, is how this tiny offshoot of Judaism, which subsequently went on to change the world, originated. Right? If it was dreamt up on a idea of some dude who died, who tried to do the right thing, but was ultimately murdered by the state because of some crafty people, or maybe that didn't happen. Maybe he's just an idea, okay, well, you see that in history in other ways, and skeptics like to point to the fact that, there's all these Jesuses running around, all these end times messianic people who wanted to throw off the shackles of Rome. We have no clue about them. We don't know their followers. We don't know their teachings. We don't know their tenets other than being anti-Roman, and we know so much about Jesus. Why did they win over everything? Right. And so much so that once you kill its leader, it didn't go away. In fact, the opposite seems to happen, is that the leader came back. And so our authors have a really good a breakdown here of the origin of Christianity and the weirdness surrounding it. So Ehrman writes about what happened after Jesus' death. He says this, but then something else happened. Some of them began to say that God had intervened and brought him back from the dead. The story caught on, and some, or all, we don't know, of his closest followers came to think that, in fact, he had been raised from the dead. And so, so they're just crazy, they're just mistaken, or they wanted to grab power, and they seem to have done it.
Yeah. Well, something happened, though, right, to do this, right? And we're not exactly sure.
They just got in their head.
Yeah.
We really liked following this guy around, claiming to perform miracles. It was a lot of responsibility. We've gotten a lot of boats and did things and arguments. I just want to go back to fishing, but maybe we can fleece the people out of some more money or talking to slaves who have none. But okay,
that's right. So while Ehrman accepts that the disciples came to believe that Jesus was resurrected, and our authors point out in his most recent book how Jesus became God, he seeks to explain away the empty tomb by arguing that there was no known tomb to begin with. There wasn't a tomb, that's what he says, right? But, is this really historically credible? Right? There wasn't a tomb? Right?
Probably not.
Right. So he attempts to defend this claim by pointing out that neither Joseph of Arimathea, the man who placed Jesus in the tomb according to the Gospels, nor the tomb itself was ever mentioned in the earliest creed, right? Which would be 1 Corinthians 15,
right?
Verses 5 through 3,
right? And that's a big thing. Even Gary Habermas points to that and says even skeptical scholars view that as a creedal creed, and so much so that it might even originate. I think he said something like 6 months after the resurrection event, and so that's coming from the people that he's talking to. So yet 1 Corinthians 15:4 does say he was buried.
Oh, so
buried what?
In the air, not a tomb.
Right. So what did Paul think Jesus was buried in, or on, or under, or around?
Yeah.
It only leaves you so many options there. Moreover, since Paul follows he was buried in the same verse with the affirmation he was raised, the obvious historical conclusion is that whatever Jesus was buried in, presumably a tomb, was now empty, or he was raised somehow.
Yeah.
What is more, the mere lack of a specific reference to Joseph of Arimathea must not be construed to imply that Paul and the Creed deny the event happened. Right. Creeds are meant to be condensed expressions of faith, not exhaustive and detailed historical accounts. The thing's only 2 verses long, and they're not the longest version. It's not like Psalm 119.
He left out this detail, right?
Right.
He doesn't talk about how Jesus was not speared in the side. He doesn't talk about all kinds of things. Well, it's just a creed, right? And it's just a summary. It's a condensed expression of the faith.
Doesn't that assume that the people who are creeding are know what he's talking about, reference it, and maybe even there's a gospel present that one of his companions has written, so he could just be like, well, there you go. If you want to know more, see the attachment. Right. Gospel of Luke.
So Joseph of Arimathea isn't mentioned in this creed, and therefore we know that Jesus wasn't buried in a tomb.
This poor rich man who gave up his spot, a tomb that no one else was buried in, and he's lost in this creed of 2 verses. He must feel slighted.
That's right. Also, Ehrman argues that Roman policy didn't allow the crucified body to be buried. Right? That was part of their policy. And there's our authors tell us that there is some truth to this in certain contexts, but because Ehrman hasn't provided the reader with all the historical evidence, he ends up concealing more than he reveals, right? So yes, to a certain extent, that is the case, that they didn't allow crucified criminals, right, to be buried. But if this were the normal way the Romans treated the Jews in and around Jerusalem, why did the Romans and the Jews not simply reply to the Christian claim that there was an empty tomb on these terms? Of course there's nobody in the tomb because he was never allowed to be buried. So boom, end of story, right? Not he's risen, no, or not, somebody stole the body. No, he was never buried. That would have been the end of it, right? Mm-hmm. Right? That would have been the proper response to claim of a resurrection in an empty tomb.
Right. So Craig Evans, who's a well-known scholar, demonstrates with reference to Philo and Josephus, among various other sources, that in peacetime Jerusalem, relative peacetime, and just outside its walls, with its unique political and social situation, right? I mean, we see that throughout history. We see it in the Gospels. I mean, the fact that Pilate was releasing known criminals at a certain point in Passover, and the very fact that he killed Jesus or whipped him when he's like, I don't find fault with this, I wash my hands of it, but if you want it done, like, it's on you. Boom. I mean, doesn't that signify some speciality there at that time with
regard to their relationship with the Jews and how they treated them and that sort of thing?
Yeah. So the Roman administration seems to have normally respected Jewish burial customs for the executed. It's one of the reasons why the Jews have to take Jesus to the Romans, because that's pretty much what they wouldn't allow the Romans to do. Yeah, you can have your own temple guards and the
Jews. Yeah, they wouldn't allow the Jews to do. Yeah.
Right. So the Jewish leaders could hit people with stones for all the sorts of stuff, and they just couldn't carry out capital punishment, which is purveyed by Caesar himself. So to cite an example from Evans, its quote is this: the Jewish historian and apologist Josephus adds that Roman procurators who succeeded Agrippa by abstaining from the interference with the customs of the country, kept the national peace. This is from Jewish Wars. And then customs that included never leaving a corpse unburied against Appian there.
Right, so they just kind of followed the Jewish custom that allowed them to do their deal with regard to these executed people, and because they didn't want to, upset the apple cart, as it were. Right. There was some relative peace, kind of, right? And so why stir it up, by, this kind of, activity?
I mean, that's one of the reasons why Pilate was taken out, was because he let this Jewish situation
get out of hand.
Yeah. And so, and we see Joseph of Arimathea and probably Nicodemus going before Pilate and asking to take the body, especially at the time that it occurred, so that that they can go wash and be part of Passover and et cetera, because they're touching a dead body and being unclean. So all these things are evidences for this burial, and so this is what they're doing here. So had the Roman governors in Israel, especially in the vicinity of Jerusalem itself, regularly crucified Jesus and left their bodies hanging on the cross, it is unlikely they would have kept the nation at peace,
right.
Because of all the things surrounding man's cursed who hangs upon the tree. So there's a long history within the Jewish mindset of why that would be wrong, especially at the time it was occurring as well. Right,
good. And finally, with regard to this issue of crucifixion and burial and that sort of thing, the archaeological evidence, which Ehrman fails to include, supports the contention that in Palestine, the Romans often allowed for the crucified to be buried, right? For instance, in a survey of the archaeological evidence, Evans cites how certain human remains, which had been given proper burial around Jesus' time, shows signs of Roman execution, right? So you could tell if the body had been, crucified by what it looked like, right?
Pretty holy.
Yeah. or at least the bones, right? So he also notes the dozens of, or even perhaps more than 100 nails that had been found in tombs and ossuaries, right? So some of these nails included traces of human calcium, indicating that they're likely used in crucifixion, right? So why would you put nails in a tomb with
box,
the body? Yeah. Well, those were part of the, I don't know.
Yeah. Casting nails before, I don't know. Yeah. So Ehrman accepts that Jesus' disciples came to think that, in fact, he had been raised from the dead. Okay, so he agrees with that. His argument against the burial of Jesus once again highlights Ehrman's way of, at times, telling only part of the story. That the resurrection account caught on is further evidence that this known tomb must have been emptied. After all, the claim would have been quickly disproven if Jesus' body had been found, put on display. There's a reason that the Jewish leaders went to Pilate and asked that guards be put on the tomb. They could have just pointed and said, "No, he's in there."
Yeah, he's still on the cross. Right, what do you mean, right?
But we don't find this. We don't find it in Josephus. We don't find it in Philo. We don't see them writing about how this crazy sect calling themselves the Way or Christians. They think that the Messiah rose from the dead, but he's clearly in Joseph of Arimathea's tomb at this spot. We don't see that at all.
Yeah. So since Christianity began because of an empty tomb and because of Jesus' earliest followers claimed that Jesus rose from the dead, what is the best historical explanation for this proclamation and the tomb with no body, right? For some reading our author's book, and for some, who will talk, the greatest challenge to accepting Christianity is not textual variances, right, or diversity of, the early church. Some people believe this, or, Gnostic Gospels may have been part of the deal and they were kicked out. No, right? The greatest challenge has to do with the question of the supernatural.
Right.
Right.
Was it possible?
That's right. In other words, can modern people well acquainted with the basis of science accept the reliability of documents filled with stories of miracles? That's the issue, right? Yeah.
We see this in C.S. Lewis's book Miracles, where he says, if you don't even allow for the possibility of miracles, then what does saying a miracle is possible even do in your mindset? Yeah. Coming from a worldview without miracles, nothing can be a miracle.
Yeah.
So that's what. It's a good book, really good book. This question has more to do with one's worldview than it does with any deficiencies in the New Testament itself. If there is a God who created the world, as the Bible claims, then miracles caused by God are not only possible, they are expected.
Yeah.
Arguing that the Bible cannot be true because miracles cannot happen is sort of like arguing that the earth can't revolve around the sun because everyone knows the sun revolves around the earth. Yeah. Okay.
So not only is that talking about circular, but that's a circular argument.
Right. Yeah. Ecliptical arguments. Yeah. So once you allow historical evidence to point you forward rather than holding an a priori bias against miracles, the evidence is amazingly strong for a bodily resurrection of Jesus. And this is what people like Gary Habermas try to do and others.
Right. So as an approach to looking at some of this evidence, our authors wants to survey two of the most commonly held alternative explanations, right? Some, such as Ehrman, recently have claimed that the disciples likely just simply hallucinated the whole thing.
Yeah, freaky.
And, of course, our authors are going to suggest that, there are several factors that make such an explanation unreasonable.
Yeah.
And so they go through a list of these various things. So the first one is while hallucinations do occur, since the disciples, Paul, James, that is the brother of Jesus, and at one time more than 500 people claimed to have seen the resurrected Jesus, they would all have had to experience the same hallucination, of the resurrected Jesus.
Right.
And in some cases, they would have had to experience it simultaneously.
Right.
And so, that's not how hallucinations work, right?
Right, and complicated ones. So seeing Christ, okay, he's up in the sky. I see a cloud. It kind of looks like him. He's on my toast. It's burnt in this pattern. He's in the fire. I see him. No, I saw him walking along the seashore. I sat down. He made a fire. He put on some fish. He ate. Right?
Yeah.
All these things. He passed through. He the walls. He asked us to put our fingers in his side. All these.
Yeah.
It's more than just. I kind of see a hazy,
some fuzzy,
thing.
and we're all seeing it, kind of
at
thing.
the same time.
Yeah.
So they're really in tune with each other, I guess. So second, while it has been argued that Jesus' followers were in such a state of grief that they hallucinated, this would hardly explain why Paul, remember Paul, the guy who killed people,
persecuted the church. Yeah.
I mean, he was brought in and it was a nervous situation. Yeah. So Paul, a committed Jewish leader who was persecuting Christians and clearly not grieving, would have hallucinated. Yeah. The road to Damascus. Is he such filled with grief about what he has been doing? Paul, why do you persecute me? Oh, horses are knocked down. This light comes from the sky. Noise is heard. Third, the hallucination theory does not explain why the tomb was empty. Again, we still go back and say, look at all these crazy people, tongues of fire floating over their head. They're talking in these different languages, and they're saying that this tomb is empty. Well, I mean, I remember that. We crossed the road coming here to go to Passover, and I remember that Jesus guy being on the cross at the crossroads there. We can just go to his tomb. There it is, guys.
Yeah.
You're
in the story.
Settle down.
Yeah.
Nothing's going to come from this.
Others have claimed that the disciples simply made up the whole resurrection story. Right?
Lunatic
so it wasn't hallucination. It was just made up, right? They wanted Jesus to be the Messiah so badly and were so disappointed after his death that they concocted this grand hoax, right, is what our authors tell us. They stole the body of Jesus and then claimed Jesus really was the Messiah and that he had been resurrected from the dead. Yet, obviously, this theory cannot hold any water either.
They bribed the guards who would be put to death if anything happened. First, it makes no sense that the disciples would make up a story that claims Jesus is Messiah because he was shamefully crucified and then was raised from the dead, since this was not common expectation for a Jewish Messiah.
Yeah, so nobody expected a crucified Messiah.
No one.
Right? In fact, the Messiah was supposed to be the one doing the crucified.
Right. He was supposed to be whipping the Romans out of Israel.
Yeah.
Ehrman himself makes the point that Jesus did not meet the expectations of the first century Jews had regarding the Messiah, and Ehrman is certainly right at this point. And this is why in the Gospels, when Jesus tells his disciples that he would be killed and then he would rise again, disciples do not comprehend his prediction. Well, what do you mean about this? And he says it multiple times, and they're like, I mean, he's talking in stories at times, and then he tells us what's happened. Let's ask him, because maybe he forgot to explain to us what he
kind
meant.
of parable is this, right?
Take up your cross and follow after me. Okay, it's hard. You're using the language of the cross. Ehrman would say that that's a later incantation, but dying. You mean like die to self? I don't know what that means. No, that literally means I'm going to die. That's why we're going to Jerusalem, even though Jewish leaders hate us. I don't know what that means, Jesus. You're going to have to keep going.
In fact, because of these expectations of what the Messiah would do, right, and because of the prevailing cultural worldview, it would have been difficult for people to accept the resurrected Jesus, right? I mean, you had to, why in the world would they accept this kind of Messiah? Right. The idea that the disciples would have made up the story of Jesus' resurrection assumes that people were expecting the Messiah to first be killed and then to rise from the dead. And so, that's what people are expecting. This is the one. That is not what they were expecting, right? Or were at least open to the idea, but this just wasn't the case.
Palm Sunday, this is the Messiah who comes, takes away the sins of the world. He's our king.
Yeah.
He's dead. Oh, man.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully
it's over.
Hopefully no Romans saw that. Yeah. What is more is if the disciples made up such a claim, it seems impossible to believe that they would have carried their hoax so far, being severely persecuted, in many cases giving up their lives, in very gruesome detail, mind you, for what they knew was a lie that they themselves had concocted.
Yeah, so I know this is a lie. I know it's not true. I'm just making it up, but I'm willing to die for it?
Yeah. I'm not going to recant if I'm hung upside down and a saw is placed between my legs and they start cutting until I'm dead. I'm pretty sure the word fanatical comes to mind there. And so there's at least something there. So if someone is going to deny the resurrection, he or she must be able to explain how a small band of defeated followers of Jesus were transformed almost overnight into bold witnesses, risking death by proclaiming his bodily resurrection before many of the same people who 50 days earlier had participated in his crucifixion.
Yeah.
They go out, they're in a locked room, then they come out of the locked room and they seem emboldened, and suddenly they're growing in population, and they're doing it at the peak time when Jewish Jewish people are coming into the city, and they're creating followers. This is an odd thing happening.
Yeah, so, that they made it up, come on, really? Thirdly, that all four Gospels have women as the first eyewitnesses to the resurrection stands against those who claim these accounts are, mythical legends produced by the disciples, right? If first century Jews were going to make up a story, it would be counterintuitive to make women the first eyewitnesses. Why? Well, in this culture, women were not permitted to testify in a court of law, right? So their testimony wasn't seen as reliable as men. The fact that all four Gospels include women as the first eyewitnesses then points to the historicity of the resurrection. Mm-hmm. After all, if the Gospel writers were simply inventing the stories of the resurrection, surely they would have invented male witnesses, right? As the first report of the empty tomb.
Yeah, John gets there first, then Peter, because he's slower. But then Mary can come up behind. Yeah. She's at least third.
Yeah, but we won't have Mary say anything.
Right. Yeah.
So as a man's testimony was viewed as reliable and would stand up in court, but all four Gospels have women as the first witnesses. The most reasonable explanation of this, having women as the first witnesses, is that this is how it actually happened. Right.
And they're trying to accurately portray it, because it would have been so easy for them just to say, well, yeah, it was them, but I mean, they came back later. Let's put them second.
That's right.
No, they're saying, like, we're hiding. Us 11 men are in hiding, and
the women are going forth
and they're
to
like,
deal.
Let's go ask the Romans if we can anoint the body.
Yeah.
Anoint the body for a Jew. To touch a dead body, it makes you unclean. You have to purify yourself. Go outside the city. All these things, but they're the ones doing it. Oh, okay. Well, that's a little embarrassing, isn't it? Isn't it, Peter? So finally, the alternative model says you create scenes involving luminaries to buttress the credibility of the made-up story or of a source otherwise unknown. Right. Yet, we do not have a report in the tradition of Jesus' appearance to Peter alone or James alone.
Who were the luminaries?
Right, yeah. I mean, especially those two. Yeah. If one were making up such stories and multiplying them, why do we not have such a detailed account when the tradition knows of such appearances.
Yeah.
This shows how carefully and circumspectly the tradition was passed on. There are no additions of the type we might expect if the stories were created to make an impression.
Right.
So aliens come down. Where are they going? The White House. There's no other person that they would respond to. It's got to be the president of the United States. It can't be anybody else.
Right. Right. So, if they did make it up, they didn't do a very good job.
Yeah, it was terrible work.
N.T. Wright has articulated this. He says that the historian may and must say that all other explanations for why Christianity arose and why it took the shape it did are far less convincing as historical explanations than the one the early Christians themselves offered. Right? That Jesus really did rise from the dead on Easter morning, leaving an empty tomb behind him.
Right. When we see these other messiahs rise up and they die, the group just goes away, or they find a new one to follow.
Right.
We really don't like the Romans. You say that you're the Messiah that has come because, what's a better rallying cry than I am in the line of King David and I am here to throw out, just like we did the Babylonians and the Assyrians. Well, we didn't do that, but we should have, and so we're going to do it with the Romans, who are exactly like the Babylonians.
Finally going to get one here.
Yeah. And then they get killed.
Yeah.
So the last part here is called Taking Up the Challenge. Ehrman tells the following story of how he began his university classes.
This is really interesting.
Yeah,
right?
they say this. This is Ehrman's quote. The first day of class with over 300 students present, I ask, how many of you would agree with the proposition that the Bible is the inspired word of God? Whoosh! Virtually everyone in the auditorium raises their hand. I then ask, how many of you have one or more of the Harry Potter books? Whoosh! The whole auditorium. Then I ask, and how many of you have read the entire Bible? Scattered hands, a few students here and there. I always laugh and say, okay, look, I'm not saying that I think God wrote the Bible. You're telling me that you think God wrote the Bible? I can see why you might want to read a book by J.K. Rowling. But if God wrote a book, wouldn't you want to see what he has to say? Never be challenged by the atheist. Always be challenged by somebody else. But this is exactly accurate.
Yeah.
If you believe this is God's very word, the creator of the universe, the person that is the only person that can save you from the damnation to come, the destruction, that you can only have peace through him. But sometimes I got other things to do. I got video games to play. I got to go meet friends. I got to eat. All those things that I can't do to flip open a book.
Yeah. So our authors, say we couldn't make the point better ourselves, right? The challenge for everyone who thinks the Bible is or even is possibly inspired by God is to actually read it. Right. Our hope is, they say, in this particular book, Truth in a Culture of Doubt, they hope that the book has equipped us to give people the reasons why they should shed their skepticism and the doubts of the surrounding culture to give the Bible a chance so that they might experience the power of God who inspired this book.
Right. All right. And so there we will end it. Hopefully you've enjoyed this book. Again, we so far have picked something a little different from the categories of apologetics, from theology, from philosophy, and hopefully this has grown your confidence, your faith in the Bible, as they would say. And we also thank Andreas Kostenberger, Darrell Bach, and Josh Chantra for writing this. And there's this version, and there's other versions for high school students and the like. That comes in a kind of a 3-volume.
Truth Matters.
Subset.
One of them, yeah.
And so
the other thing that we might want to point out is at the very end of the book, there's a quick question and answer guide. And what they do, and this is really, really good, they go through each of the chapters and the claims in the chapters, and then they give a sentence or two or maybe a paragraph answer. And so you get a summary of the whole book in about 3 or 4 pages, which is really, really good.
Yeah, it's a nice little breakdown of what was that one claim? What's a quick response to it that I can point to? Well, they've done the work for you. Yeah. And so hopefully you've checked out the
summary
books by
6 pages, but that's okay.
by the authors, and if there's support for the book that you can purchase it their authors and ministries of them, and I've always included them in the show notes, so you can go back to any of the episodes and check them out there. And we thank you for joining us for another book, and we'll have to figure out what our next one is, and we'll let you know, as always.
Yeah.
So thank you. Thanks for liking, sharing, subscribing, all those fun things. Again, we do it regardless, because we have been doing it, and so we thank you for joining along us in the book club, and hopefully you've gotten something out of it. So we'll see you next time.
See you next time.